Unnerving multiple hauntings have been said to occur at Bettiscombe Manor in Dorset, England, but the most powerful accounts are those of the Screaming Skull. The story behind this chilling presence goes right back to the 17th century. Bettiscombe Manor is the ancestral home belonging to the Pinney family and is built on very ancient ground. The historical account states that one ancestor, Azaiah Pinney, had been sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered for taking part in the failed Monmouth Rebellion against the new Catholic king James II in 1685. A hasty bribe saved him so that he was instead transported to the colonies to work as an indentured servant in the Caribbean. With his money and contacts, Azaiah eventually worked his way up to become a rich sugar plantation owner on the Isle of Nevis. Many years later, in the early 19th century, one of Azaiah's descendants, John Frederick Pinney, disposed of the Nevis estates and returned to the family's stately home of Bettiscombe. He took with him an enslaved man from the island. The enslaved man is generally thought to have been a West Indian native, but may also have been African, as most slaves were at that time. The unfortunate man, being accustomed to a tropical climate, was unable to tolerate the windy, rainy Dorset weather. He succumbed to a serious illness, said to be suspected tuberculosis. As he lay on his deathbed, he made one last request that his body be taken back and buried in his native home of Nevis. It was said that, added to this entreaty, was a warning not to fail him, which carried an inherent curse. If his dying wish were to be ignored, he said, then the house would have no peace. The story therefore records that, if the slave's body were not returned to his homeland for burial, a terrible curse would befall Bettiscombe. Azaiah's descendant promised him that he would fulfill his last request, and the enslaved man passed away soon after. However, the Pinney family decided to avoid the expense of repatriating his remains, and the promise was never kept. They buried him in the grounds of St. Stephen's Church Cemetery, which was just a short distance from the house. As soon as the burial had taken place, people began hearing unearthly roars, moans and screams coming from the grave, as well as experiencing unexplained occurrences. Over many months, the local villagers were both annoyed and terrified by the phenomena, which also included windows rattling and doors slamming unaided around the manor itself. The villagers approached the manor to seek advice, and the broken promise was recalled. The body of the servant was immediately exhumed and taken to the manor house. The remains were placed up in a loft there, where at once the disturbing phenomena ceased. In the process of time, the skeleton slowly degraded, and somehow only the skull remained, although some accounts tell that the body was shipped back home to the West Indies or Africa, and the skull left behind. Over the years, many attempts to dispose of the skull were made, only to discover, soon after its removal, that screams and other unnerving phenomena would soon follow, and continue until it was again placed back inside the manor. On one occasion, the skull was thrown into the depths of a nearby pond by an occupant of the manor who was simply repulsed by the appearance of the skull. This person was then troubled by screams and moans all night long, and the next day hastily retrieved the skull and brought it back inside the manor. One old account has said that on a particular night of the year, a phantom coach hurtles up the road from Bettiscombe Manor to the local church graveyard. Local witnesses call this incident the funeral procession of the skull. A writer called Eric Marple once spent a night in the manor with the skull in the 1960s and claimed not to have heard any screaming, but reported being plagued by nightmares. He refused and offered to stay a second night and quickly left the manor. The present-day owners of Bettiscombe Manor are never bothered by the skull, as they never remove it from its box in a bureau drawer. It has only been reported that, ominously, whenever the outbreak of war is near, the skull has been seen to perspire blood. Over the years, the skull has continued to become surrounded by mystery. In 1963, an archaeologist called Michael Pinney owned Bettiscombe Manor and had the skull analysed by a professor of human and comparative anatomy at the Royal College of Surgeons. This scientist concluded that the skull did not belong to an African man at all. Rather, it was that of a European woman aged between 25 and 30 who lived 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. The fossilised skull is thought to have been submerged in the well near the manor house at the base of Pilsden Pen, a hill that covers an Iron Age ritual site. The skull may have originated from the hill itself, and its shiny surface may have been caused by its immersion in the well and the minerals contained in it. Skulls or severed heads were significant objects in ancient times, often used as offerings to water spirits and placed in wells and ponds. They were believed to house spirits who would protect and safeguard a family so long as they were treated with respect. The sacred heads were feared to the extent that many would not even disclose where the heads lay for fear of bad luck. As with any ancient account of events, there are varying versions. Another popular story about the Bettiscombe skull adds further to the confusion about the skull's origins, with the claim that Pinney and the enslaved man originally had a fight to the death. The skull was all that remained of the loser, except that it was not recorded who lost. The supposed curse surrounding the skull has been sourced by historians as saying that, should anyone be foolhardy enough to try and remove it from its preferred resting place, quote, "it will scream and cause agricultural disaster if taken out of the house, and also cause the demise within a year of the person who commits the deed." The curse has even been referred to in a court of law. In 1874, Judge J.S. Udall declared that the skull had been preserved on the premises for a long time prior to its present tenancy, and that, quote, "the peculiar superstition attaching to it is that if it be taken out of the house itself would rock to its foundation, while the person by whom such an act of desecration was committed would certainly pass away within the year."